Before we begin, here's a question to sit with. Have you ever done something for someone who did not deserve it? Not out of weakness, not out of lingering feeling, but simply because that is the kind of person you decided to be when you were no longer who you were to them? Drop your answer in the comments as you listen. Gabriel Ashford had spent 10 years telling himself a story about why he left. The story changed slightly depending on the year, the occasion, the version of himself doing the telling. But the center of it was always the same, that it had been necessary, that both of them had been unhappy, that leaving had been the honest thing. He had been saying this story so long that he had almost stopped hearing it. On the day of his daughter's college graduation, the story stopped mattering, because he collapsed on the ceremony lawn in front of 400 people. And the woman who caught him, the one who moved before anyone else, the one whose hands reached him before he hit the ground, was the woman he had walked out on 10 years ago, his ex-wife, his daughter's mother, the woman who had rebuilt her entire life from the wreckage of his decision. And she caught him anyway. There are moments in life that do not ask your permission before they arrive. They do not check whether you are ready. They do not care about the story you have been telling yourself. They simply happen, on a sunny Saturday afternoon in June, in front of 400 people, with the specific inconvenient timing of something that has been building for years and chooses the worst possible moment to arrive. This story is about one of those moments, and about what happens in the weeks that follow when two people who have not been in the same room for years find themselves, suddenly, and without warning, in each other's orbit again. It is not a story about a second chance. It is a story about a woman who caught someone who did not deserve to be caught, and what it revealed about both of them. If you have ever been the stronger person in a moment that required strength you did not owe, this story is for you. Before we go in, one ask. If this story reaches something true in you today, write, "She caught him anyway" in the comments. Let this family know you are here. Now, let us begin. Gabriel Ashford had spent 10 years building the kind of life that looked, from the outside, like a complete success. He was 53 years old. Ashford Ventures had grown from a regional technology investment firm into a global operation with a portfolio valued at just under $3 billion. His name appeared on boards and in publications and in the specific shorthand of people who moved in certain rooms, a name that meant something, that opened doors, that carried the accumulated weight of 2 decades of correct decisions. He had a penthouse in San Francisco. He had a second apartment in New York. He had a driver and a personal assistant and a chef who came 3 mornings a week and a trainer who came the other 4. He had everything that the story of a successful man was supposed to contain. What the story did not contain, what he had edited out across 10 years of telling it, was what it had cost, specifically who it had cost. He had walked out on his marriage when his daughter Imani was 9 years old. Not through a single dramatic decision, but through the accumulated weight of a man who had decided, gradually, and then with increasing conviction, that the life he had at home was constraining the life he was supposed to be living. He had told his wife that he needed more, that the marriage had run its course, that they had both changed and that staying would be worse than leaving. He had believed all of this. He had also believed it because believing it was easier than the truth, which was simpler and less flattering, that he was afraid of the specific intimacy of being known by someone and had been retreating from it for years before he finally left. Imani had been 9. He had told himself she was resilient. Children were resilient. She would be fine. She was fine. She had been fine in the specific way of children who learn very early that one of the 2 people who are supposed to show up consistently does not, and who build around that absence with the quiet competence of someone who has no other option. He had paid for everything. School, activities, her mother's apartment, later her mother's career relaunch. He had paid without complaint because paying was the version of presence he was most comfortable with. He had missed the dance recitals and the school plays in the years when she still thought he might show up for ordinary things. He had shown up for graduation. Dr. Renee Cole was 46 years old. She had a PhD in clinical psychology from UC Berkeley that she had completed 3 years after Gabriel walked out. Not despite the divorce, but partially because of it. Because the specific wreckage of that period had forced her to decide what she was actually going to do with the rest of her life, and she had decided, with the clarity of a woman who has been through the worst and come out knowing herself better, that she was going to do the work she had always meant to do. She ran a private practice in Oakland, and was a part-time faculty member at a Bay Area university where she taught a course on trauma-informed care that her students consistently rated as the most significant of their program. She had not remarried, not because she could not have. She had been approached, more than once, by people who saw in her what was genuinely there, a woman of warmth and intelligence, and the specific, grounded quality of someone who has been tested and not broken. She had dated carefully and with her eyes open and had not found anyone she wanted to build something permanent with. She was not waiting for Gabriel. She had not been waiting for Gabriel in any meaningful sense since approximately year 3 after the divorce, when she had sat in her own therapist's office and arrived, with the focused precision of someone doing the actual work, at the full truth of what their marriage had been and what her part in it was, and what she was going to do differently. She had done things differently. She had built a life that was entirely and specifically hers. She had also raised Imani, which was the most significant thing she had ever done, and which she had done largely alone, with the support of her sister and her closest friends, and the particular fierce love of a mother who understood that her daughter's father's absence was not a reflection of her daughter's worth. She had made sure Imani knew that. Every day for 10 years, in the small and large ways that a mother makes her child understand their own value, she had made sure Imani knew that. She had come to graduation for Imani. She had not thought about Gabriel beyond the practical logistics of being in the same space for a few hours. She had not thought about catching him. Nobody thinks about that. The graduation ceremony was held on the university's main lawn on a Saturday morning in early June. 400 graduating students in caps and gowns. Families filling the tiered seating around the lawn. Parents, grandparents, younger siblings with phone cameras already raised. The specific festive energy of a community celebrating something earned. Renee arrived early and found seats near the middle of the family section. Her sister Claudia was with her, had been with her for most of the significant moments of the past 10 years, the woman who showed up with food and presents and the specific gift of knowing when to talk and when to simply be there. They sat together in the morning sun, and Renee looked at the program and found Imani's name and felt the particular pride that belongs specifically to people who did the work and watched it matter. She had not looked for Gabriel. She had known he would be there. Imani had told her, carefully and with the specific diplomacy of a 22-year-old navigating two parents who shared a history they had never fully processed together. She had absorbed the information and filed it in the category of things that simply were, and had decided to be exactly what she always was at events like this: present, warm, there for her daughter. Gabriel arrived 17 minutes before the ceremony began. She saw him when he found his seat 3 rows in front and slightly to the left of where she was sitting. 10 years. He looked older in the ways that time makes people older. The hair more salt than pepper now, the face carrying more weight in the lines around his eyes. He also looked, she noted with the clinical precision of someone trained to observe, slightly not right. His color was off. There was a tightness in the way he was sitting. She noted it and looked back at the program. The ceremony began. The dean spoke. The valedictorian spoke. The names began to be called, and the graduates crossed the stage, and the families applauded, and the morning grew warmer, as June mornings do when the sun is out and the chairs are closely set, and several hundred people are generating the particular heat of a crowd. Renee was watching the stage for Imani's name. She did not see what happened with Gabriel until the woman beside him made a sound. She looked. He was slumping. Not dramatically, not a movie collapse with arms thrown wide. The specific, quiet slump of someone whose body has simply stopped cooperating, going sideways in the chair, already past the point of catching himself. Renee was out of her seat before she had made a conscious decision to stand. 3 rows. She moved through the space between chairs with the focused efficiency of someone who had training in crisis response and a body that had made the decision before the mind caught up. She reached him as he slid from the chair. Her arms went around him from behind. She caught him. His weight came against her and she held it. Not easily. He was considerably heavier than her, but she held it with the specific braced steadiness of someone who had done the necessary thing too many times to be theatrical about it. Someone around her was already calling for help. Claudia was beside her immediately, her hand on Renee's shoulder. Gabriel's eyes were partly open. He was not unconscious, but he was not fully present either. Renee said his name. His eyes found her face. For a moment, one strange, suspended moment above the noise of the crowd and the rushing of people toward them, he looked at her the way someone looks at a face they recognize from a distance that is difficult to account for. Then the paramedics were there, and she stepped back and let them work. Imani had not yet walked across the stage when it happened. Someone found her in the graduate procession, and she came to the side of the lawn in her cap and gown, and her expression was the expression of a 22-year-old who has been managing the emotional logistics of two separate parents for 10 years and has just been told one of them has collapsed. She looked at her mother first. Renee was standing at the edge of the paramedic activity, composed and clear-eyed and monitoring in the way of someone trained to monitor. Imani said, "Mom." Renee said, "He is stable. They have him. He is going to be all right." Imani said, "What happened?" Renee said, "His heart, most likely. He will need to go to the hospital." She looked at her daughter with the specific steady warmth she had always given her. "You are going to go back and walk across that stage. I will handle this." Imani said, "Mom, I cannot." Renee said, "Imani, you have worked 4 years for this morning. You are going to walk across that stage. I will be watching, and your father will be fine. Go." Imani looked at her for a moment, the specific look of a daughter who knows her mother completely and trusts her completely. Then she went. Renee rode in the ambulance. Not because anyone asked her to, not because she had any remaining obligation to the man on the stretcher, but because Imani could not go and Imani had asked, with her eyes across the graduation lawn, and Renee had answered with hers before any words were exchanged. She sat in the ambulance beside a man she had not been in a room with in 3 years, and she monitored his vitals with the clinical attention of someone who had not lost the training just because the relationship had ended. He regained full consciousness in the ambulance. He looked at the ceiling first, then at the paramedic, then at her. He said her name. She said, "You are in an ambulance. You collapsed at the graduation. You are going to be all right." He said, "You caught me." She said, "Yes." He said nothing for a moment. His expression was the specific expression of someone coming back from the edge of something and trying to understand where they are. Then he said, "Imani." She said, "She walked across the stage. She got her degree. She is coming to the hospital after." He closed his eyes. She looked at the monitor. The hospital was a good one of the best cardiac units in the Bay Area. The admitting physician was competent and thorough. Renee spoke to him briefly in the corridor with the specific authority of a medical professional communicating with another, gave him the relevant context she had observed, and then stepped back and allowed the clinical process to proceed. She sat in the waiting area. Claudia arrived 40 minutes later with coffee and the specific presence of a woman who had been doing this, showing up in waiting rooms, for 10 years. She sat beside Renee and said, "How are you?" Renee said, "I am fine." Claudia said, "That is not what I asked." Renee looked at her coffee. She said, "It is strange to be here. I did not expect to be here." Claudia said, "You caught him." Renee said, "Yes." Claudia said, "Why?" Renee thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything, with the full attention of someone who had learned that glossing over things cost more than examining them. She said, "Because I was the closest person and I knew how to help, and not helping was not something I was going to do." Claudia said, "Just that." Renee said, "Just that." Claudia looked at her with the specific expression of a sister who was not entirely sure that was the complete answer, but who had the wisdom to let it be enough for now. Imani arrived 2 hours later still in her graduation dress, cap gone, down over her arm. She had come directly from the ceremony. She looked like someone who had walked across a stage and received a degree and processed a crisis simultaneously, and was managing all 3 things with the specific quiet competence that her mother had modeled for her for 22 years. She sat beside Renee. She said, "Thank you for staying." Renee said, "Of course." Imani said, "And for making me go back." Renee said, "You worked 4 years for that morning. Nothing was going to take it from you." They sat together in the hospital waiting room, mother and daughter, in the specific, comfortable silence of 2 people who know each other completely. And Renee thought about a 9-year-old girl who had been told her father was leaving and who had looked at her mother with an expression that contained a question Renee had spent 10 years answering with her presence. She had answered it. She was still answering it. Question for you. If you had the chance to be the bigger person in a moment that cost you something, would you do it? And would you do it quietly, without expecting anything in return? Gabriel was kept in the hospital for 4 days. The diagnosis was a significant cardiac arrhythmia, the kind that had been developing quietly for years and had chosen a June morning in the sun to announce itself completely. The cardiologist was direct. This had been building. The stress levels, the schedule, the absence of anything that could be called rest. His body had been sending signals for a long time. He had not been paying attention. Renee visited once. Not because she owed him a visit. Because Imani asked, and because she had spent 22 years modeling for her daughter what it looked like to do the right thing, even when it was uncomfortable. She came on the second afternoon. She sat in the chair beside the bed and she asked him clinical questions about his medications and his follow-up plan and his discharge instructions with the professional composure of someone who had decided the frame for this visit before she arrived. He watched her go through it. Then he said, "Renee, can we talk? Not about my medications." She looked at him. He said, "I know I do not have the right to ask that. I know you came here for Imani. I know you caught me on that lawn because that is who you are and not because of anything I deserve." He said it plainly and without deflection. "But I have been lying in this bed for 2 days, and I have been thinking about things I have not let myself think about in 10 years, and I would like to say some of them to you." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Say them." He said, "I told myself a story about why I left. I have been telling it for 10 years. He looked at the window. The story was that we had both changed, and that leaving was honest. That was not the true story. The true story is that I was afraid of being known by you, and I had been retreating from that for years before I left. The leaving was not honest. It was the final step of a long retreat." Renee said nothing. He said, "I missed 10 years of Imani growing up. Not because I was not invited. Because I convinced myself that paying for things was the same as showing up." He stopped. "It was not the same." She said, "No, it was not." He said, "I know that you built everything yourself. I know you finished your PhD and built your practice and raised our daughter and did all of it without asking me for anything except what was legally agreed. I know what that cost. Not because I watched it, I did not watch it, but because I know who you are." She looked at her hands. He said, "I am not asking for anything. I want to be clear about that. I am not asking you to receive this as an apology that changes something. I am just telling you that I know what the true story was, and I am done telling the false one." The room was quiet. She said, "Why now?" He said, "Because I collapsed on a graduation lawn, and the person who caught me was the person I walked out on, and I do not think I can keep pretending that is not the most clarifying thing that has happened to me in 10 years. She looked at him. She said, "I appreciate you saying that." She said it clearly, and without warmth and without coldness. "I have been at peace with what happened for a long time. Not because it did not hurt, it did. But because I did the work and I arrived somewhere real. I am not going to pretend your words changed the 10 years. But I hear them." He said, "That is more than I deserve." She said, "Yes, it is." She stood. She said, "Focus on your recovery. Imani needs you healthy." She paused at the door. "Gabriel." She said his name the way she had always said it, not as a weapon and not as a door opening. Just his name. "Do not waste the second chance your body just gave you." She walked out. He looked at the ceiling. His board member and oldest colleague Richard had flown in on the 3rd day. Richard was the kind of man who delivered concern in the language of business because that was the only language he trusted. He sat beside the hospital bed and said the company needed Dominic back at full capacity and that the medical team's timeline was concerning and that there were conversations that required his direct involvement. Gabriel said, "I hear you." Richard said, "We also need to talk about perception. You collapsed publicly. There will be coverage. We need to get ahead of the narrative." Gabriel said, "The narrative is that I had a cardiac event and I am recovering. There is no other narrative." Richard said, "The woman who caught you, your ex-wife, was photographed. Several people posted it. It is circulating." Gabriel said nothing. Richard said, "I am not saying it is a problem. I am saying it is a conversation to manage." Gabriel looked at him. He said, "I am not going to manage Renee. She caught me when I collapsed. That is what happened. If someone wants to write about it, they can write about it accurately." Richard said, "Gabriel." Gabriel said, "I appreciate you coming. I will be in touch about the timeline for my return." He said it with the flat, final tone of someone closing a conversation. Richard left. Gabriel lay in the hospital bed and thought about the word manage. He had spent 10 years managing things. Managing his schedule, managing his image, managing his story about why he left. He was done managing. He was discharged on a Thursday. Imani came to collect him. Her presence at the hospital every day had been the thing that had kept him most tethered to what mattered. She drove him to his San Francisco apartment and helped him get settled and made sure his medications were organized and sat across from him at the kitchen table with the direct, clear-eyed expression of a 22-year-old who had things to say and had decided to say them. She said, "Dad, I need to tell you something." He said, "Tell me." She said, "I have been watching my mother take care of things my whole life. She took care of me. She took care of her patients. She built her career and her practice, and she did all of it without complaining and without making me feel like your absence was something I needed to grieve publicly." He listened. She said, "She caught you on that lawn because that is who she is. She rode in the ambulance because I needed her to. She came to the hospital because I asked. She did every single one of those things not for you. I want you to understand that. But because of the kind of woman she decided to be when you gave her no other choice." He said, "I know," she said, "and I need you to know that if you go back to being the version of yourself that called on birthdays and sent checks and showed up for the big things and disappeared for everything in between," she paused, "I will love you anyway because you are my father. But I will not pretend that is enough anymore." He looked at his daughter. 22 years old, her mother's eyes, her mother's specific quality of directness, and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt seen, not comfortably, completely. He said, "I understand." She said, "Good." She stood and kissed him on the forehead the way she had when she was small, which she had stopped doing sometime in the years when he stopped showing up for ordinary things, and which she had apparently decided to do again. He sat alone in his apartment after she left and made 3 decisions. The first was about his schedule. The second was about his board. The third was about a phone call he was going to make on Saturday morning. Not to ask for anything, not to reopen anything, but because there was a conversation he had started in a hospital room that deserved to be finished properly. The Ashford Ventures annual summit was the most significant event on the firm's calendar. 300 limited partners and portfolio company representatives. Gabriel had opened it every year for 20 years. He rewrote his opening remarks the morning of the summit. He delivered the first 10 minutes as prepared portfolio performance, investment strategy, the year ahead. Then he set the prepared remarks aside. He said he wanted to say something that was not in the document. He said that 2 weeks ago he had collapsed at his daughter's college graduation and that the experience had clarified something that 20 years of building a successful company had not. He said that he had spent the past 2 weeks examining what he had spent 20 years not examining. The cost of building something at the expense of the people who deserved his presence. He said he was making changes to his role that would allow him to lead the firm at a different pace and with a different set of priorities. He named the changes specifically. He also said this. He said, "The woman who caught me when I collapsed is someone I walked out on 10 years ago. She caught me because that is the kind of person she is, not because she owed me anything. And watching someone extend grace to you that you have not earned is a specific kind of education that I recommend to no one and which I am grateful for." He said her name. He said she was a clinical psychologist in Oakland who had built something extraordinary while he was building something impressive. He said extraordinary and impressive were not the same category. He said he was still learning the difference. The room was very still. After the summit, his assistant called him. He did not pick up. He was already driving to Oakland. He called her from the parking lot outside her practice. She answered on the second ring. He said, "I am outside your office. I drove from San Francisco. I am not asking to come in. I just want to say something, and then I will leave if you want me to." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Say it." He said, "I said your name at the summit this morning, in front of 300 people. I said what you did, and I said who you are, and I said extraordinary and impressive are not the same category, and that I am still learning the difference." She said, "I know. Imani sent me the clip." He said, "I did not tell you I was going to do that." She said, "No?" He said, "Are you angry?" She said, "No, I am." She paused. "I am thinking about it." He said, "I am not asking for anything. I want to be completely clear about that. I am not asking you to receive what I said as the beginning of something. I said it because it was true and because you deserve to have something true said about you in a room full of people who needed to hear it." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Come in. I have 40 minutes before my next patient." He went in. They sat across from each other in her office, the office she had built, the space that was entirely hers. And they talked for 40 minutes in the careful, honest way of two people who know each other's history and are choosing, deliberately and without pretense, to be real with each other in the present. He did not ask for a second chance. She did not offer one. But when he stood to leave, she said, "Imani's birthday is in August. We are doing dinner. She would like you to come." He said, "I will be there." She said, "Sit down at the table. Stay for the whole dinner. Ask her about her plans." He said, "I will." She said, "And Gabriel." She said his name the way she said it in the hospital room, not as a weapon and not as a door opening. Just his name. "Show up." He said, "I will." He left. She sat at her desk for a moment after he was gone. Then she picked up her phone and called Claudia. Claudia answered immediately and said, "Well." Renee said, "Well." Claudia said, "And?" Renee said, "And I do not know yet." Claudia said, "But." Renee said, "But I am not." She paused. "I am not closed." Claudia said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, that is enough for now." Renee said, "Yes, it is." She looked at the clock. She had a patient in 4 minutes. She was a woman who showed up for the people who needed her. That had not changed. It was the truest thing about her. He collapsed on a graduation lawn, and the woman who caught him. The one whose arms reached him before anyone else moved, whose hands held his weight with the specific braced steadiness of someone who does the necessary thing without theater, was the woman he had walked out on 10 years ago. She caught him not because he deserved it. She caught him because she had decided, a long time ago, who she was going to be regardless of what he had been. That is the kind of character that is not built in good moments. It is built in the 10 years of ordinary mornings when you choose, again and again, to be the person your child can count on, to be the person your patients trust, to show up, completely, for the life you are actually living rather than the one that was interrupted. She had built that character. He had spent 10 years building something impressive. He was finally beginning to understand the difference. Final question for you. Is there someone in your life who has caught you? Not necessarily literally, but in the specific way of being there when you needed them most, when you had not earned the right to need them. And have you ever truly acknowledged what that cost them? Leave your answer below. Your voice belongs here. If this story found something real in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. One share. It costs nothing and means everything. I love you all. I will see you in the next story.